It's Wednesday. Welcome to another episode of Ecoville. I'm your host, Nonsikelelo Kwaka. Today on the program, we're joined by Rufaro Matsika, who is an environmentalist and also working as a community development research officer at the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change, Zimbabwe. Rufaro is in Nairobi, Kenya, where she is representing Zimbabwe at the Inaugural Nairobi Summer School on Climate Change. The summer school aims at enhancing advocacy on climate justice through younger activists. More than 700 people are taking part in the pilot project and were chosen from thousands of applicants from around the world. Welcome to the program, Rufaro.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so please give us a brief background on yourself and how you got involved in environmental work.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Rufaro Matsika. I'm an environmental scientist, as mentioned, and climate change activist. I work with African Youth Initiative on Climate Change Zimbabwe as a community development research officer. And also I am working on becoming a greenhouse gas management expert. I hold a bachelor's degree in environmental science and technology and a master's in safety, health, and environmental management. And how I got involved in environmental work, I think it's just explained itself. My background is just environment. Mm-hmm. I've always been passionate about environmental conservation, and I'm pursuing a career in it. Thank you.
That's great. Like I said in the introduction, you are currently in Nairobi, Kenya, attending the inaugural Nairobi Summer School on Climate Justice. Please tell us more about the summer school and its objectives.
Okay, yes, that's very true. I am currently in Nairobi, Kenya, attending the first ever summer school in Africa on climate justice, called the Nairobi Summer School on Climate Justice. It is the first ever summer school on climate justice to be conducted in Africa, and it is an innovation by the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance with partnership with the Kenyatta University in Kenya. And it is being conducted in Nairobi at the Kenyatta University as the venue. The school is going on for 12 days. So now we are in the last week, and the school has brought together participants from like all over Africa and abroad. There are representatives from America, we have the Philippines, Africa. I think over 49 nations are represented, so it is well attended and there is diversity. The objectives of the summer school are to capacitate climate activists, climate scientists with knowledge so that they can practice their activism from an informed point of view, so that when they go into the field doing the activist work, we don't go in there not speaking from like a general perspective or an uninformed point of view. They want the activists to be stating the facts of what's really going on the ground. And it also aims to like bridge conversation between prominent scholars and researchers, because the people who are capacitating us, they are world-renowned researchers, professors, scientists, and even negotiators who got to negotiate at the UNFCCC Conference of Parties. Mm-hmm. Representing the global north and the global south. They are all involved in capacitating us. So yes, we are gaining vast knowledge. And so bridging the conversation between the prominent scholars, researchers in climate justice in the global north and those in the global south. And it also aims to enable activists like from all over the world to share their experiences, best practices, perspectives, and to reflect on just pathways to a low carbon, climate resilient development pathway. And I think the long-term objective of the summer school is to promote and create voices, especially creative voices, especially from the youths and social, scientific backgrounds, and their innovations that tackle vexed questions on environment and climate justice, and including intergenerational equity. So yeah, basically, and the plan is for the Climate Justice Summer School to be happening annually from this year onwards.
Oh, okay. From a Zimbabwean perspective, why do you think it's important to attend such conferences? What's the benefit for us as a country?
As a country, well, Zimbabwe is a developing nation, and it is part of the global south, who's being heavily impacted by impacts of climate change. And as much as we need to tackle climate change through mitigation and adaptation, we are very vulnerable, and we need to also focus on adaptation, not just mitigation only. But currently, most climate finance is being directed towards climate change mitigation, as we have all noticed, and adaptation is like on the lower side. So, which we think is kind of an injustice. So we now need to think from a perspective, whose agenda are we pushing now? Climate change mitigation, yes, the developing countries have already developed polluting their climate, which is now causing the climate change, but we're still on the pathway of development. And as much we are being affected by climate change, and we need to adapt. So as much as we need to mitigate, we also need to adapt to climate change. But then when the resources and attention is being focused more towards mitigation than adaptation, then there becomes a discrepancy there. So we need to fight for justice so that we also get the relevant attention that we need in terms of climate change adaptation. Yes, everybody is being affected by climate change, but then there are those who are more vulnerable compared to others, depending on adaptive capacity. If you're being affected by climate change, but then you have the money to cope, then it means you quickly get out of the situation compared to people who are being affected and they don't have the means to actually become resilient or adapt to the situation. So it's a matter of us raising our voices. Africa as developing nations come together, raise our voices so that when these issues go to COP, our negotiators will also be able to negotiate on behalf of us in terms of loss and damage and adaptation.
Okay, you introduced two terms that I feel our listeners would need a definition on. Adaptation, is it adapting?
Yes.
And mitigation. Yes. Please explain those. What do you mean?
Okay, so climate change mitigation, simple terms, just means activities or initiatives that are done in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions or enhance our carbon sinks. So it's a matter of reducing our emissions into the atmosphere and also having innovations which also sequestrate the carbon that's already in the atmosphere, absorbing it out of the atmosphere. Then in terms of adaptation, basically means like climate change is already happening, it's there. So how are we going to cope or to survive amidst that situation? So these are coping mechanisms of surviving in the climate era so that we will be able to continue living in an abnormal situation.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that, because you just have the ordinary person just listening and then they don't understand some of this terminology. So it's very important to clarify some of these things.
Very true.
Right. So what do you think participants of the conference will learn and benefit from attending?
Participants, firstly, it's a great opportunity to view Kenya.
Yes. Yes.
Kenya, if it was your first time, well,
yeah.
But well, that's besides the main objective. I think participants will learn to network, create partnerships with fellow climate scientists and activists from across the continent, share best practices on the innovations that they are also doing in their respective organizations in their countries, how it has worked for them and how we can replicate them in our own countries. And yeah, you get to network, partner with key successful climate activists. And I think also participants are going to gain knowledge or key concepts on climate change and climate justice. Like climate justice is still I can't say a new topic, but it's still something that not many people can understand. What people do understand climate change, but then when you introduce the justice part, then it can become a bit complicated. So being capacitated on climate change and the concept of climate justice being delivered by world-renowned researchers and scientists, professors, and even negotiators at the UNFCCC processes. And also acquiring this knowledge will help climate activists to disseminate information from an informed point of view. Sometimes there is street activism where you're just going to shout and scream in the street, but without really knowing what you are saying, what's in the ground. Or sometimes you go and demand things that you don't know that your government has already done or is already in the process of doing, but because you're not well read or you don't understand the processes, you might just go with empty activism where you're going to demand things that are already being done. So sometimes you need to also be well researched, read, which are some of the things we are being encouraged to do. So we will also hear key aspects and concepts of critical negotiation processes which happen at the conference of parties, and identify areas with gaps in terms of meeting global South needs, because there is need for justice in terms of global South versus the global North. And this will also help climate activists with knowledge of areas to target when making their demands or stating their stance at these negotiations.
So you were talking about interaction, it's an opportunity to interact with people from different countries. So as you're attending the conference with youth from different parts of Africa, how has that interaction changed your perspective on climate change issues in Africa?
It is true. The school is being attended by hundreds of youth from all over continents and abroad. And it has been an interesting couple of days as we got to interact with diverse people from different backgrounds, not just academically, but socially. And they also share their experiences, climate change impacts, and their climate activism work. I have actually gotten to appreciate that climate change is a reality and is hitting everyone just as bad as it is affecting us in Zimbabwe. When I was told that I was coming to Kenya, I thought Kenya would be hot. I packed just summer clothes, but you arrive here, you realize it's different.
Shame!
It's actually cold and rainy.
Oh, shame!
Yes, and you ask them, they say, it was actually supposed to be summer and hot, but then it's been like this. The climate is no longer predictable. Things are changing.
Things are changing.
It's not just in Zimbabwe we are facing this. So I've gotten to appreciate that it's not just Zimbabwe which is being affected. And it also made me realize that it is not only Zimbabwean environmental activists and climate activists who are unhappy about the mushrooming of fossil fuel exploration projects by Chinese. In the era where we are all trying to push towards investing in renewable energy and moving away from dirty fossil fuels. It's one thing when we have the plans that we already had before, but then actually trying to invest in new big core plants, fossil fuels, when we have made a solid commitment that we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and be part of the Paris Agreement. So I really realized that it's not Zimbabwe only. Majority of the African countries actually came forward when we're having this discussion and stated their grievances. And it seems like it's the same story everywhere. Everyone is unhappy about the Chinese and how they are also degrading the environment along the way and human rights issues. I think you know the story. And I also learned that Zimbabwe is ahead, is on track in terms of climate change action. I think we need to also applaud our Ministry of Environment, Climate Change Management Department in terms of addressing the Paris Agreement compared to other countries. We already have our National Climate Change Learning Strategy, and we are in the process of also having our National Climate Law and our National Climate Fund. Some countries have not yet even updated their NDCs. They don't have a learning strategy. So I think we are ahead. We are ahead.
No, it's actually good to know that we're actually on track. and we are putting forward policies that will help in the fight against climate change. And I hope that the government also gets to intervene in terms of mining that's not sustainable, and they actually protect the environment than watching people from outside the country come in and plunder or pillage the country, and then we are left with the damage. So I hope something will be done in that area.
Yeah.
So do you think youth in Africa have a full understanding of the impact of climate change?
From what I've gauged so far, I think youth generally have a full understanding of climate change and its impacts, and they are taking up the space as they have realized that if they do not push, no one will. They are the leaders of tomorrow and of today. And the youths, they're involved in various mitigation and adaptation projects. And I think the only issue is being lack of access to adequate climate finance to carry out these projects or to move them from the pilot phase and actually amplify the projects. That's the major issue, because youth are lacking capacity in terms of applying for these climate funds, because maybe it may be complicated to draft the proposal or come up with a solid proposal, or sometimes you actually have the proposal, but then you get stuck when sometimes the grants require you to have previous projects that you may have done and show results of the project. Sometimes the youth may be startups. You don't have prior projects. And in that situation, it may be very hard to get the climate finance. But yeah, generally the youth are showing a full understanding of climate change.
How do you think, or what can be done to ensure that youths have access to funding? As you've said, maybe that's what's stopping their full participation.
What do I think should be done?
How do you think youths can have more access? Should the government be chipping in? Should it be?
I think when it comes to climate justice, we are not just looking at the global not for funding. We are all in this fight for climate change fight together. But we can contribute as much as we can as a nation before even looking outside for funding from the global north. We should also try to show commitment that yes, we do want to tackle this situation, but we can do to this extent, and we need help from there to the greater extent. So I think our national governments should also try to set up national youth funds specific for environmental climate projects, a national climate fund, which we know that youth will easily be able to access when they call for applications. Youth can just apply with their projects, and they know finance will be easy to access, compared to when youth are now required to be competing with huge NGOs, older people who now have experience in this proposal developing for the same grant, and you stand a very little chance to get that fund. But when we have localized funds which youth can access, I think it will be a major step.
So how can African countries rally together and come up with consolidated efforts in the fight against climate change?
Well, African countries, I think it is clear that we are all facing the same situation, and the situation is bad. So I think African countries can just come together, discuss their needs and commitments and how they intend to implement these commitments, and following the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, they can work together to play their part in fighting climate change, and then be in solidarity with their needs when they attend this big conference of parties. And then they should maintain their stance and refuse to be bullied up there, because by bigger powers into agreements which are selfish or inconsiderate, for example, pushing for just mitigation, ignoring adaptation, when we are suffering more from the climate change impacts compared to the global north, and we have very little adaptive capacity and very vulnerable. So I think when there is solidarity, Africa's main content and priority is adaptation, and we need to see more climate finance being pushed towards adaptation, because I think what I've heard so far from this conference, the general notion is that more finance is being pushed towards mitigation, because mitigation projects have return on investments compared to adaptation projects where it would be like not an investment but just helping people to cope, but without like any business aspect of it. But then we can't just rely on that and say it's not a business case, so we are going to focus more on mitigation. We also need adaptation funds. Yes, there is the adaptation fund, but how many are actually going to access it? Like, actually, there was a discussion where they were saying the Green Climate Fund, nations are contributing from the global north. They have contributed a negligible amount compared to the amount that they were initially set to put into the fund. But then, because it's accessible to everyone, both north and south, those who have better experience in developing this proposal for these GCF funds, they will be able to develop the proposal very quickly and access the funds, such that by the time we finish over 2-3 years developing the proposal, the funds will be very little left. So it also becomes a justice issue. So I think as Africa, it just needs to be more vigilant, conducting both mitigation and adaptation and resilience, building it so that they happen concurrently, but not prioritizing one over the other. They just need to be happening concurrently.
So lastly, as the summer school is coming to an end, with all the things that you've learned during the last 2 weeks, how are you going to come and implement that here in Zimbabwe?
It has enlightened me in terms of the politics that happen in climate change. Like, sometimes when you have no one telling you about these things, you won't really understand. You just be viewing climate change as just, it's climate change happening. But then there are deeper politics that happen inside these negotiation rooms and these conference of parties. So, yeah, I think it has enlightened me in terms of how I think and how I'm going to also approach climate change issues. So when I come back, it will be very good for me to also share what I have learned with other youths through various platforms. As a member of AIC, we also have this session called Fact Talk, which we hold every Wednesday, and which is meant to capacitate youth on climate change topics, everything about climate change, so that we just capacitate youth so that about facts on climate change, so that they also, when they go out there, they will be able to do their activist work from an informed point of view. So we have quite a pretty huge following. So I'll also come back and share what I have learned, also write a report, recirculate it, and strategize on how we can move forward from there, trying to implement what I have learned into our activist work.
Thank you, Rufaro, for coming to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we hope you continue to advocate for climate justice.
Sure. The time to act is now.
Yes, it's always now. Now is better than tomorrow.
Yes.
So thank you again to all our listeners. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow us on our social media pages. Our handle is Ecoville ZW on all platforms. Join us next week for another episode. I'm your host, Nonsigele Lokwaka.